Hello, my name is Jordan Jocelyn. I'm a member of the Health, Youth, and Bachelor's program with KYA. I'm a sophomore in Bullitt County, Kentucky, and this will be my first Children's Advocacy Week, and I'm very excited. First, I want to thank you all for joining us for today's Kids Count Lunch and Learn. In this year's Kids Count data book, we heard from many young people from across the state, and the common message was listen to us. Some of the reasons it's important to listen and lift up youth's voice when making decisions that impact us is because we are the ones that will be impacted by them. Young people can give their experiences on the situations that are being discussed and how they see them in their everyday lives. It is important to listen to Kentucky's young people because we are the future. Look at the kids that you see in your schools, online, and even when you're walking in the grocery store. We are the future doctors, future educators, future business owners, and future community leaders. The steps we take today are the ones that will help the future of Kentucky. Without listening and lifting up youth's voice, decisions that are made may not be helping the youth like they're intended to, and may be harming us in the future instead. Listening to the youth can help make a better future and a better Commonwealth. Data can help make a positive change in communities because when you have the facts, it can help you make better decisions. As an example from the 2022 Kids Count data book, 1 in 6 sixth graders say they struggle with depression and anxiety. This data can prove that we need more mental health resources in middle schools, which can help make a positive change in communities. Please, listen to Kentucky kids. We need you. Thank you. Now I'll turn it over to Patricia, who will give us an overview of the data book. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jordan. Thanks for that opening and reminding us why we're all here today. So welcome to everyone. It's wonderful to see you on this Monday morning, the first day of Children's Advocacy Week. And my name is Patricia Tenen, and I'm going to kick us off along with a number of my colleagues to tell you about the 2022 County Data Book, which is part of the Kids Count project. So this year's book is our 32nd annual report of both state and county data to measure and improve child well-being. So today for our Lunch and Learn, our goals are we'd like to just give you an overview of the county data book and the 4 domains in which we look at child well-being. We're going to share really briefly some policy solutions that are tied to the data presented in the book, because we firmly believe we don't just present data, it's data for action. And so we want to also connect it to solutions that are going to change the trajectory for kids. We also want to lift up youth voice. Thank you, Jordan, for helping us to start it off. And we're also going to be telling you about the young people we engaged in this, helping to create this book. And we also want to make sure you leave today feeling empowered to use the data to take action during Children's Advocacy Week and also beyond. Our mantra is what gets measured gets changed. And we hope that you leave today feeling better informed and better prepared to put this data to action for kids. Okay, next slide, please. So for many of you, any of you who have seen this year's book, you'll see that we had a theme really around youth voice in the governor's race. So as you all know, Kentuckians are going to decide who we want for governor in November of this year. And while kids cannot vote, they have a major stake in who gets chosen and what the governor's priorities will be. So looking ahead to that governor's race, we thought it was important to use our Kids Count platform to invite young people from across the Commonwealth to share their hopes and their concerns with us. And we wove their voices and their input throughout our book this year. And it's something that we want to continue to do in all future books and throughout the project. Some themes that we heard from the young people, one was they want safety at school, whether that's being prepared to act in the event of a school shooting, or taking measures to improve school climate and be preventive to make sure that there's not just physical safety, but psychological safety at school. They wanted safe and connected community spaces. We heard from kids both in rural and urban about the need for spaces that they are allowed and welcome to be active or simply to hang out with friends. And as Jordan mentioned, there was a resounding theme of more support for mental health that rang loud and clear. We heard that they also wanted education as a pathway to opportunity, which included schools being adequately funded, but also that what they're doing at school is really connected and preparing them for the future. Young people also talked about the importance of having connections to caring adults and adults who checked in with them and they felt safe sharing things in their lives about. So we're really grateful to all the young people who shared with us, and I'd encourage everyone here to first take some time to read their input in the book, but also then think about how you can engage youth and young people in your community about the things that matter to them. And I think this is especially important timing to do this with the governor's race. How can we engage them? Because the decisions impact them a lot, and they need to have their voices heard. So next, I'm going to kind of segue into more of the book content. First, this is just an overview of the child population by race and ethnicity. There are roughly about 1.1 million children ages 0 to 19 living in Kentucky. Kids make up about 25% of Kentucky's population. So 1 in 4 Kentuckians are kids. And you can find, here's an overview of the race and ethnic background of Kentucky kids. And one thing to note, while we are, majority white population, there are kids of color throughout our state in every county. And so we encourage you to look up the child population by race for your county. You can do that on pages 16 to 19 in this year's book, or you can look on our website. I'll share more about the links there. So now I'm going to invite my colleagues to go through the 4 domains of child well-being, starting with economic security. I'm going to turn it over to Corinna Cash.
Thanks so much, Patricia. Hey, everybody. Like Patricia said, my name is Corinna Cash, and I'm a policy analyst here at Kentucky Youth Advocates focused on economic security. And I'm going to be going over this year's economic security indicator. This year, we focused on 4 indicators: children in poverty, meaning they live below 100% of the federal poverty line; children in low-income families, meaning they live below 200% of the federal poverty line; children living in food insecure households, meaning they do not have enough food to live an active, healthy lifestyle; and then finally, children in households with a high rental cost burden, meaning they pay more than 1/3 of their income to rent and utilities. When looking at these indicators, it's really important to remember that many Kentucky children and families live in communities that have suffered a lack of investment and subsequently offer few stable job opportunities. This means jobs that not only pay a sufficient wage, but also offer benefits such as healthcare, paid family leave, and stable hours. For community of color, this lack of opportunity has resulted in significant disparities in categories such as income by race and home ownership rates. Historic and ongoing discriminatory lending and housing practices has prevented members in the Black community from building wealth through home equity and business assets. And this wealth gap has multiplied across generations, leaving many Black families living in poverty and earning incomes too low to even meet basic family needs. So in order to afford housing, food, transportation, and other necessities, most Kentucky families need an income of at least 200% of the federal poverty line. And in Kentucky, 44% of children live below this line. For a family of 3, 200% of the federal poverty line is equivalent to about $46,000 a year. Families living below 200% of the federal poverty line often struggle to afford basic needs, putting them at risk of things like housing and food insecurity. 16.1% of Kentucky kids live in a food insecure household, but in 15 counties, this number is as high as 1 in 4. Additionally, 43% of Kentucky kids live in a household with a high rental cost burden. One of the things we really focused on in this book is the impact of COVID-19, and housing insecurity is something that was massively exacerbated by the pandemic. And like most of our indicators, affected community of colors to a far greater degree. Black children are twice as likely to live in a household with a high rental cost burden than white children. And because of this, Black families are also at an increased risk of eviction. Evictions have a massive impact on a family's future housing instability. And our Blueprint for Kentucky Children addresses this by calling on the legislature to automatically expunge evictions after a set number of years and seal eviction filings that don't result in a judgment so that we can give families a second chance at achieving housing stability. Moving on to our divider slide, this year's divider slide focused on the public safety net resources available to low-income families of young children. Because families are more likely to be early in their career and have more significant costs, such as childcare, young children are more likely to live in poverty, and almost 1 in 4 Kentucky children aged 0 to 4 live in poverty. Programs like the Child Care Assistance Program, the Special Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program for Women, Infant, and Children, also known as WIC, SNAP, and the Kentucky Children's Health Insurance Program can have a huge impact on the economic security of families and can help ensure families not only meet their basic needs, but also can stretch a tight budget. However, we know that participation rates in these programs vary significantly, and there's pretty significant disparities. For example, 75% of eligible Kentuckians participate in SNAP, but only 35% participate in WIC, despite the programs having similar eligibility and both having the end goal of ensuring food security. Part of the reason for these disparities is lack of knowledge about available programs and also complicated and confusing application and recertification processes. So like Patricia mentioned, we don't only like to talk about data, we also like to talk about solutions and what we can do to improve the lives of Kentucky kids and families. So looking at these safety net programs, we came up with a couple of solutions. One of them is to allow the processes to apply and verify continued eligibility for public supports, so families are not providing the same information for every program they apply for. A lot of the public benefit programs have very similar eligibility, very similar paperwork requirements, and we can combine all of those so families aren't filling out 4 applications for 4 different programs. The next one was to ensure administrators of safety net programs refer families to other supports they may be eligible for. So for example, if a family has a young child and is applying for SNAP, asking or telling them they can also apply for WIC so they know the program's available to them. And then finally, adopting a refundable state earned income tax credit to make work pay for low income families, boost young children out of poverty, and also really address that benefits cliff that has kept so many families out of the workforce. And I will pass it over to Sarah, I believe.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sarah Vanover, and I am a Policy and Research Director with Kentucky Youth Advocates. And I'm going to talk to you today about education. As a former educator and as a mom of an elementary school and middle school student, education is one of the vital topics that I think we have to discuss about our kiddos. 4 of the points that we really outlined this year in the data book, let's go back. Thank you. Include kindergartners who come ready to learn, 4th graders who are proficient in reading, 8th graders proficient in math, and high school students graduating on time. These really build upon one another. And so we really have to start back at the beginning, looking at children who enter school ready for kindergarten. Now, for years, that number was at 50%. Kentucky had 50% of our students that were entering ready, which was a low enough number. But again, the pandemic over the past few years put our children at a disadvantage. Child care programs closed or reduced their numbers. Public schools were learning virtually for a while. And so that meant that public school preschool also had to do that. And Head Start programs also had some virtual learning components. And many of our young children, they need to be hands-on learners. They need to be in a classroom with their peers, learning how to follow directions, work in a group, and regulate their own emotions so that when they enter kindergarten, they're in a place where they're ready to learn. And so we have seen a decrease in these numbers. Now, when our children don't come to school ready for kindergarten, then we obviously know that those are going to be numbers that are impacted later on. 4th grade reading proficiency. The reason that we look at 4th grade so often is up until 4th grade, reading is really about how to learn how to read. But after 4th grade, students start to use reading as a tool to learn every other subject area, social studies, science, all the different areas. And after we've had these 5 years, kindergarten through 4th grade, teaching them how to read, children that are still not proficient in reading at that age are going to struggle even more as their secondary education really focuses on using that tool for all other areas. And again, 46% of our kiddos. 8th graders proficient in math. Again, that's a huge pivot point. Only 36%, almost down to a third of our students that are proficient in math at that age. And then as we go down and look further down the list, high school students graduating on time, we still have, we've made progress, and that's fabulous. Laws like students staying in school until they are 18, things like that have helped with those numbers, but we know that students are going to struggle to graduate and to graduate proficiently if they're struggling with math and reading earlier in time. And so these are factors that we want to keep in mind and think about. As an early childhood specialist myself, think about a good start, thinking about having quality early childhood education to build a future on, and then allowing those students to build on that as they move through elementary and secondary school and graduating to go on to a new training program, whether that be a tech school, college, apprenticeship, something where they can be successful and part of the workforce when they graduate. One of the things that we specifically looked at in the data book was students experiencing homelessness. And in Kentucky, there's many different ways that a student may experience homelessness. It could be that a family was evicted. It could be that a single parent is, living on a couch in a friend's home, trying to find stable situations. Or it could be that an older student has left the home that they were born into due to being kicked out or for their own personal safety. And so because of that, we have over 21,000 students in Kentucky that are experiencing homelessness. And of course, there's racial disparity within those numbers. We see children of color experiencing that more often than white children because of some of those longstanding barriers. When we think about eviction rates and different barriers that families have to overcome, more often our students of color experience that than our white students. And then we see other factors that come into play too. Students with disabilities, students in rural counties. Maybe it's because in rural counties, employment is harder for parents to find, and so the family becomes homeless sooner. Maybe students with disabilities have more behavior problems that are leading to a rough relationship with the parent, and they choose to leave the home. There's a lot of different factors that can come into play, but we see, if you look at the graph of Kentucky, we see that this is a problem throughout the state, and that there are obviously areas that have much more concentrated problems as well. Now, as we think about, just like Corinna said, as we think about these problems, we also want to think about solutions. And students living in homelessness is something we definitely want to come up with ideas for. So we know that some of the housing barriers have to do with eviction processes and how families are evicted from their homes. That could be that those evictions stay on their record for a long time after somebody is evicted, and so they're not able to apply for housing in the future. It could be that when a family gets behind on their rent and they're evicted immediately with none of their resources, and the landlord keeps all of their possessions and throws them out after just a day. So we'd really like to look at policies that are more friendly to the family, that have been through evictions and foreclosures, and ways that it can be less traumatic on a student to have to leave their whole life behind if their family is asked to leave. A huge issue that we want to look at is homeless students being able to apply for an ID without the support of a parent. If a student has had to leave their home, either because they were kicked out or for their own personal safety due to abuse or domestic violence, then they need access to some place to live. They need access to getting a job, and they need access to state support services. Without an ID, a student may not even be able to stay in a homeless shelter, but they wouldn't be able to apply for a job. They wouldn't be able to get a bank account. There's many things that they wouldn't have access to. A driver, getting to drive a car, all kinds of things. And so we need to have a program in place where a student has the ability to get an ID without parent consent if the parent and the child have been estranged due to complicated issues. Also, we want to think of strategies that specifically look at some of the groups who suffer from homelessness more often. That could be, again, students with disabilities, teens that are pregnant and get kicked out of the home, or they're trying to parent a young child, our LGBTQ plus community, who often may be asked to leave their home by their parents, forced out. And then again, minority races that might not have as much access to the same resources due to consistent barriers in their past. So we want to make sure that all of these children have access and strategies to grow up in a safe home with the necessary amount of food, and they feel safe in order to come to school in a great learning environment and be capable of learning instead of focusing on what has made them stressed and have that anxiety. With education covered, I'm going to pass things over to Alicia, and she's going to talk about children's health.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm Alicia Watley with Kentucky Youth Advocates as well. I'm a policy and advocacy director, and my focus area is on children's health. So I want to just take a few minutes to go over the first here is the 4 key health indicators that we look at in the book. So these are the ones that are broken down by county. So feel free to take a look at your own county and see how you're doing. So you can see that we have some that are improving over time, which is good news. So the rate of teen births and also the rate of women smoking during pregnancy, you do see the improvements here. But I do want to note that although this number is getting better, we still have nearly 1 in 6 births that are to mothers who reported smoking during their pregnancy. And that is a behavior that impacts both the mother and the baby. And it also ties directly into some of the other indicators that you see here, such as low birth weight and other health outcomes for the child. So the other thing that we see here is that the highest rates of smoking during pregnancy are among white mothers in our state as compared to other races when we break that down. A couple of measures that you see on the screen here stayed the same. So the percent of babies that are considered low birth weight when they're born. And so that is an indicator that has a lot of impacts on future health for the baby. So it's important for us to be looking at ways that we can reduce the number of low birth weight babies in the state. And so there's a lot of ways that we can be addressing that through maternal health efforts and just better data to understand what is causing some of those low birth weight babies. In addition to that, you'll see that the rate of children covered by health insurance in our state has remained pretty steady. And that rate is pretty high. Or that percentage is pretty high. So just about almost 96% of our kids are covered by some sort of health insurance, which is good news. But in addition to what we've seen in past years, it remains the same that there are some disparities here that we need to be looking a little bit closer at. So there's a gap in health insurance coverage for our Latinx kids. So you'll see this number on the screen is almost 96%. That's the overall number. But among our Latinx children, that number is only 90%. Whereas for our Black children, it's 95%, and for white children, it's 96%. So you can see how the Latinx children have been a little bit lower on coverage rates. And that's something that we've been looking at for a few years now, trying to figure out ways that we can make sure that those kids are accessing health coverage, because we know that if you have coverage, it's more likely that you'll access healthcare services. So in addition to these 4 indicators, this year's book took a look at youth mental health, kind of a closer look at that. On our divider page. And of course, this has been talked about already this morning in a couple of different ways. If you tuned into the kickoff earlier today, and also hearing from Jordan, youth mental health is very important, and it is kind of on everybody's mind right now. So we took a little bit of a deeper look at this to see kind of what's going on in Kentucky, and also a little bit of how we compare nationally with some of these numbers. So you'll see that we break down some numbers around youth suicide, mental health conditions across different racial groups, and also age groups that are most impacted. So among those data, we find that 1 in 6 sixth graders report that they're dealing with anxiety and depression. So that number only increases as children grow, with 1 in 4 Kentucky 12th graders reporting that they are experiencing serious psychological distress. So something to be looking at, that although it is occurring across all ages, there are some that are more heavily impacted, but we do need to be looking at ways to address mental health and support mental health starting even younger than maybe we think we do. So it's obvious here that this is impacting students of all ages, but we also take a look at how different racial groups are being impacted by anxiety and depression over time. And so this was first measured in 2016-17. and then again in 2019-20. So that's kind of the years where we were looking at. And so the data shows that the largest jump in prevalence of anxiety and depression was actually among our Latinx children during that time period. So it increased from about 8% to about 18%. So that's a pretty big jump. And it's just something to note that we do have some groups that are being impacted a little bit more heavily than others when it comes to these mental health conditions. We also saw increases in both Black and white youth when we looked at those numbers, but the Latinx number just jumped so much that we thought it was good to highlight that. And then the other thing that's highlighted here is really around the youth, the current suicide rates. So this is measured among 15 to 19-year-olds, and Kentucky continues to be higher than the national average on youth suicide rates. So something else to be looking at is how we can find ways to address youth suicide, ideation, and also completion of youth suicide. So like the others, we want to highlight some solutions to what we found in the book this year. So before I hand it over, I do want to take a minute to just look at these policy solutions that are highlighted. So the first one is continuing to look for ways to close that gap in health coverage, particularly among our Latinx youth. So you heard me say that they are less insured than other racial groups, and they're also more impacted by mental health conditions at this time than other groups. So those two things together mean that we're not serving our Latinx youth the way that we could be. It could definitely be improved. So we're looking for ways to close that gap in coverage to make sure that they have health insurance of some sort that will allow them to access care when they need it. The next one here is really focused on finding innovative ways to deliver care when it's needed. So this can look a lot of different ways. We look for opportunities to integrate mental health services into places where students are already going to be. So whether that is their primary care office where they maybe are going to see a doctor, or whether that's integrating these more of the mental health services into schools to make sure that kids have access where they are, where they're learning, where they spend the most time. Another piece of this is finding ways to make sure that we're continuing to use telehealth services to provide care to students. This increases accessibility and it helps families who maybe don't have transportation or have trouble accessing, during office hours, things like that. So it can help by making sure that we have additional ways that students can access mental health services if they need it. The last one here is really just finding ways to create welcoming environments for everyone. And so this includes those who are maybe immigrants or not from the United States. So making sure we have cultural competence of our providers. But it also is things like diversifying our workforce so that folks feel comfortable going to a provider and that they see providers that look like them and that they can relate to and feel comfortable with. And this also applies to other populations such as our LGBTQ+ youth who we want to make sure have comfortable environments as well. And then also making sure we're offering language inclusivity across the board on all services to make sure that folks are able to access the care they need in the language that they are most comfortable speaking. So those are the highlights from the health section this year, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Crystal.
Thanks so much, Alicia. Hi, everyone. My name is Crystal Willis, and I'm a policy analyst at Kentucky Youth Advocates. I focus on juvenile justice, and today I'm going to be diving into some of the family and community data. JC, age 11 from Hancock County, says to let me be a kid while I still am. And part of allowing children to be kids means that they deserve to grow up in supportive families and strong communities with equitable opportunities to thrive. So taking a look at some of our state data trends for family and community, we can see that births to mothers without a high school degree has actually improved since 2013 to 2015. Only 13% of births were to mothers without a high school degree, and 98 out of 120 counties improved on this measure. Next, we can see that the amount of youth incarcerated within the juvenile justice system has also improved within the last few years. 8,010 youth were incarcerated in 2019 to 2021, which is nearly half of the rates from 2014 to 2016. And so 93 counties have experienced a decreased rate of juveniles incarcerated. And while those two factors have seen improvements, child within the foster care has actually worsened, and increased to 53.7 per 1,000 children. And additionally, the percent of children exiting foster care to reunification with their parents or caretakers has also declined. And this declined from 33% in 2019 to 2021, from 38% in 2014 and 2016. And so in addition to looking at some of the state data trends, we also looked at the Kentucky's juvenile justice system. And so within our justice system, we can see that children 12 and under get complaints filed against them. And so Black youth actually make up 11% of the population, but they make up 21% of the complaints filed against them with children 12 and under. And children in rural areas are also more likely to have complaints filed against them, and majority of complaints are actually for nonviolent offenses. So to end, again, with my colleagues, we want to make sure we're not just presenting problems, but uplifting solutions as well. So to ensure safer communities throughout Kentucky and brighter futures for Kentucky's kids, Kentucky can make some common sense shifts in how we respond to young children getting in trouble. Some of those policy solutions include establishing a minimum age of at least 12 years old that a child can be held or charged with an offense, implementing prevention-focused approaches in schools, such as restorative justice practices, as well as partnering with local community organizations to counsel and mentor youth. And lastly, utilizing and offering up diversion programs to keep youth connected to their communities rather than funneling them through the juvenile justice system. One thing that Nelson Mandela says is that there can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way it treats its children. And with that, I believe I am turning it back over to Patricia.
Thanks, Crystal. And thank you to my colleagues for that dive. I know we threw a lot of information at you, but that's just skimming the surface. So I wanted to then share a little bit more about other ways that you can dig in and find all those questions that you have that you need to help target efforts for kids in your community. So one wonderful tool is the Kids Count Data Center. So the Kids Count is a national project of the Annie E. Casey Foundation. So there is a Kids Count grantee in every state, and Kentucky Youth Advocates is the grantee for Kentucky. And as part of that, we collect data. We have some really wonderful data partners that we've collected data at the state, county, school district level for decades. And then we are able to use the Kids Count Data Center. We upload the data to that. So you will find a wealth of, if there is good, reliable data on kids, you should find it on the Kids Count Data Center. And it just gives you an overview of the different areas that you could explore and find more about. And then next slide. The other tools that we have at your disposal, in addition to the county data book, are the county profiles. I know we've been putting some information in the chat about how to find those. So we have profiles for all 120 counties in Kentucky, where we break out those indicators that we shared today in those 4 domains. You can get a snapshot of how your county is doing on those 4 domains, which is a great tool. We also have an interactive data dashboard that also looks at those state trends that we shared about today. You can dig into those a little bit more. We also, hopefully you heard a theme, we know it's very important not only to disaggregate this data by county, but also by race and ethnicity, because we know often those impact outcomes for kids. And so you'll be able to find additional data by race ethnicity on the Kids Count Data Center, and more information about not only data, but publications, other tools on the race equity page on our website. And that's all available. You can see the URL there. And I'd like to take a moment just to shout out a thank you to our Kids Count sponsors. Aetna Better Health of Kentucky is our signature sponsor. They're also joined by Charter Communications and Cozair Charities. And we couldn't do this work to this level without their support. And so we're entirely grateful to them for that. And I just want to acknowledge, I've seen some questions in the chat, but I think, Mara, it looks like we're covering those. Great, okay, good. And then the next slide I wanted to just talk to you about. Here we are, it's Children's Advocacy Week. We're kicking it off, and we're counting on you. Young people are counting on you to really, as the General Assembly is convening, we want you to get involved and make sure that they're hearing from you this week and beyond. And we think Kids Count's a great tool to do that. It's a great place to start. Look up the county data, your county data profile, and share that with them. Ask them what they're doing to champion kids. We have a packed week ahead. And we're so excited to call on our legislators and ask them to make a real difference in the lives of kids. So things that you can do, there's the QR code, which will take you to our advocacy page. And there are, a jam-packed agenda for this week about ways that you can engage for Children's Advocacy Week. Make sure to register and get the app. We've got an app that can help. You can build your schedule for both in-person and virtual events. We'd also love to see you this Wednesday for our in-person day at the Capitol. We're going to have a rally in the Rotunda at 10 a.m. And we love to pack it full of advocates. And we hope that's a great day to come and schedule those meetings with your legislators and call on them to invest in kids. Also, be sure to check out the Blueprint for Kentucky's Children Policy Priorities and find out who your legislators are if you don't already know. And with that, I'm going to close out and thank you for spending your lunch with us today. Thanks for all you do every day for kids. And we look forward to seeing you at other events this week during Children's Advocacy Week and hopefully in person at the Capitol.